If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Hello and welcome to another episode of What's Bugging You. I'm your host, Chesley Elkins, here with my co-host.
Good morning, guys. I'm Brian Victor.
Morning.
And we have a special guest here once again with us. But before we introduce him, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsor.
Preventive pest control. Taking care of the pests you see and the ones you don't see. Preventive pest control. It's as simple as that.
We are pleased to have welcome back with us, our staff entomologist, Michael Swanson.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I like doing this.
It's been an interesting, I guess, last couple of weeks here, especially in New Mexico headlines. We kind of made, in a weird way, our pest control here, in an indirect way, made national news with unfortunate news of the spouse of Gene Hackman.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
And,
Betsy Arakawa.
And I guess the unfortunate way, they found out she passed away from hantavirus.
Yeah.
Which we haven't heard that. We haven't heard that since probably the 90s, right? Where it was like a big thing, or, I think the big scare.
Yeah, it feels like it used to be, like when we were younger, like quicksand too. Like hantavirus seems like it used to be a much bigger thing, but it's an unpleasant reminder.
And I think I remember, I was a paramedic in the fire department for a long time, and I think we'd always hear, like, every year we'd have these continuing education things, and there is still like a handful of cases, every year, like four to 8 cases a year, but you never heard about it because they know how to treat it now and stuff. But I guess left untreated, it's could be pretty dangerous. So,
and I had always in the back of my mind associated with people like harvesting pinon, like kind of getting, in the nitty gritty out in the, out in the woods or whatever with where the mice live. But I think it's a humble reminder that they can be, they can get to wherever the mice go, the hantavirus goes or can go.
Right, so it's a specific sort of mouse that carries the...
Generally around here, it's the deer mouse.
Deer mice, right?
Yeah, which, is probably... I think it's probably the most common species of mouse that we deal with, at least in the pest control side, certainly.
Okay.
And it's passed from their urine, right? Is what it is?
Urine and feces and saliva to a degree.
Yeah.
But generally it's with the urine. I think when it comes, that's how it gets transmitted to people usually, because it just kind of sits there and dries, but the virus stays active in the urine. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when originally this all came out, it was in the kind of isolated to the Four Corners area, and then now it's we have deer mice down here in Albuquerque, guys. I have in my house. A lot of times I'll catch one off a trap. Oh, that's a deer mouse.
Yep. Yeah, they're omnipresent all over central New Mexico.
And what are some distinguishing characteristics of a deer mouse?
Well, they have a very distinct pattern, right? So they're kind of a brown back and sides, and then a white belly, sort of like a deer, like a white-tailed deer, and I think that's kind of how they got named. So they're a little bit larger than the normal house mouse. If you think of a prototypical, like a Jerry from the Tom and Jerry show, the all gray mouse, they look just like that. They're just a little bit bigger with a brown,
like a light
back.
brown,
yeah, light brown back and a white belly.
So what can you tell us specifically about hantavirus? What makes it bad? And
well, it has for a virus has a very high mortality rate. Like untreated, I think I read that it's like good 40% of people who get it are going to die from it if it goes untreated, which is terrifying. There are treatments for it, but you have to kind of catch it early. From what I understand, it presents like a flu-like symptoms, really bad body aches, fever, chills, develops into a respiratory issue, and that's what your fluids begin to fill up with your lungs fill up with fluid, and that's where the real danger starts.
So, do you think this is something that people should worry about?
I think that people should have a background understanding of it, and just if you have mice in your house, be worry about cleaning them up. Don't just leave droppings around. And if you are gonna clean up after mice, just spray down some type of a disinfectant like Lysol or whatever. Let it sit for a few minutes and then wipe it up, and you should be good. If you're going to be going into an area like your shed or under your house where you think there's a good chance there might be mice, put on just a dust mask. Like an N95 mask. We probably all have a bunch of them left over from COVID or whatever, or from doing stuff in your garage. So I think that's a good protection. Put on gloves, put on a dust mask, and you should be in pretty good shape. Just I think common sense practices, really.
Yeah, the fact that you don't hear about it hardly at all anymore makes it think it's not as prevalent as it was, and
Yeah.
you know, people are smart, clean up, wash their hands, you know, wear masks, that type of stuff. So,
Well, that's the thing with mice too, is that there's so many things you can do to avoid getting them in your house in the first place. If you're diligent about it and you start to see those first signs of rodent activity, things chewed up, you know, maybe in the pantry or in the garage, like dog food or something, and maybe you start to see some droppings, that should be your first cue. I have an issue and I should be proactive about it. So how are they getting inside, right? So you look for, how's the seal in the bottom of my garage? Is the door to the backyard, how's the seal down there? You know, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit to look at, and things that are pretty easy to fix.
Yeah, definitely that exclusion is something, you know, we as a company can definitely provide people or direct them how to do it themselves if they're handy. A lot of times just identifying those entry points that's important. What are some other health concerns with the mice besides the hantavirus?
Well, I mean, they can be a vector for foodborne illness, depending on if they're getting around where you keep your food, right? So, you know, if they're hanging out in these areas that are, you know, that have bacteria and other things, and then they're, you know, chewing on the food that you chew on, or you know, going to the bathroom in your pantry, that can certainly be a vector for other diseases. Yeah, I'd be concerned about that. Frankly, if I see something that has mouse chew marks on it, I'm not going to put it in my mouth. But call me crazy.
you probably have inadvertently. I bet you always have
Probably
inadvertently ate something from a restaurant or something. I've been camping and like ate hamburger or a granola bar, and I looked in the box afterwards. I was like, oh, my mouth had biting this.
Yeah.
But I think I'm fine.
Yeah,
And,
you just indirectly French kissed a mouse. Congratulations.
So since we're
I'm kissing something, you know.
So since we're talking about some of the diseases that might be spread by different pests, what are some other ones that come to mind that are of concern as well?
Well, there's the big one, of course, the biggest insect killer in the world, which is the mosquito.
Right.
You know, so in other areas of the world, things like malaria and dengue and things like that are huge. Huge issues for, you know, killing millions of people. Here in New Mexico, we deal with West Nile. That's the one that's kind of established now. We have the new incidence of the Aedes aegypti species coming into New Mexico over the last few years, and that is a species that's associated with things like Zika and dengue. But as far as I know, there's no known transmission of those by that mosquito in New Mexico yet. So
we've got some other states though that have had that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just again, the importance for that, like we've talked before, is, you know, wearing, you know, long sleeves, wearing, you know, avoiding areas where they're going to be wearing, was it DEET or, you know?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of off.
Yeah.
I don't like the way it smells, but I hate mosquito bites more.
Right.
How about like more of like gross type stuff? Like, you know, you go to restaurants, people have small flies or roaches. Is there anything you're worried about getting sick from those?
Yeah. So, you know, I've read on this, and it's interesting. There have been not a ton of studies in terms of how cockroaches may spread disease to people. If you know, in laboratory tests, they have taken a cockroach of different species, and you know, they'll look for different viruses or bacteria or fungus or whatever, and certainly you can find them. So you can say, yeah, we found salmonella on this cockroach, or we found, you know, listeria bacteria on this cockroach. But there's not a ton of data showing that there's a lot of human health issues that result from that.
It's more just gross.
Yeah. Yeah, and flies are kind of the same thing. Certainly flies have the capacity to spread disease to people by landing in, so say they're hanging out at a dumpster that's full of pathogens, and then they fly and land on your food while they're cleaning themselves, you know, and the saliva is active, you know, the flies are gross. How much that attributes to people getting sick, we just don't know. But certainly we know that these bugs have these bacteria and viruses on them, and we know that they go into food, so it's probably likely. So in a long story short, it's a good idea to keep them away from your food, I think.
And your open wounds.
Yeah, that's actually with forward flies, the small flies. That's one of the things they really get into is they start hanging out on people like people who are like infirm or in comas, things like that. They kind of start hanging out around the eyes, which is kind of gnarly. Yeah, and open wounds and stuff like that.
And I know there's been some cases of bubonic plague. I'm trying to think. It's been a while since I've heard of that.
I think we had one last year.
Last year there was. Oh, okay. So that's still around. And tell us a little bit about that.
So
and how
that's
it's
primarily
spread.
transmitted by fleas.
Okay.
And so with the fleas, it's going to be small mammals. And generally that's rabbits and squirrels, I think, to a degree, too. So people who are contracting bubonic plague into Mexico, generally you can track it down to them spending time one-on-one with some, small animals, whether they're, they have like a more rural home where these animals are in close proximity to them. I guess theoretically you could have them transfer to your dog and then to you. I think that's less likely.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly that. And then cat scratch fever is one that there have been cases of that in New Mexico where people and children have died from it, from untreated scratches from cats that have been affected by these fleas. And that's...
Cat scratch fever, that was a song.
Yeah, it is a song.
Did Ted Nugent ever get treated for that, or is that still affecting him?
I think that the effects are obvious. Yeah.
I didn't know it was a real thing.
It is, yeah. Yeah,
Kind of like bed bugs. I thought it was a fake thing, too, with the bed bugs bite until got in the pest control.
Yeah, that's right. Huh? I was the same way. I had never seen what a bed bug was or heard of them really aside from that phrase until you get into pest control and you're like, oh,
honestly, probably
this is real and gross.
Probably my first 5 years in pest control, I still thought it wasn't a thing because they weren't here in New Mexico at the time. So
yeah, it certainly has gotten worse in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And the diseases that bed bugs bring us?
None. Not a single one that we know of. I mean, their harm can be psychological, right? People who are affected by or afflicted with bed bugs over time really start to get, a lot of anxiety. I think you could theoretically get PTSD from it. And there's some, if you get a lot of bites, you can have some scarring that lasts. But in terms of pathogens that they transmit from biting you, there's no evidence that they can pass bloodborne diseases.
Well, and this time of year, I'm going to kind of transition to our next subject here, but this time of year, obviously, it's getting warmer. We're getting a lot of ants. The number of phone calls received in the office has increased a ton. People having ants problems. And before we get into talking about ant problems, is there anything that we worry about with ants, as far as health issues or...
From what I know, it's pretty much similar to the story with cockroaches, where if you take an ant and you sample it for some of these bacteria, you're going to find them on them. But ants aren't spending a lot of time in our food. And as far as the transmission, the thing with these bacteria, like take, for example, salmonella, that's pretty commonly evident around environment all the time. It's when you get it in more concentrated quantities in our food when it becomes a health issue, right? So I think I'm not aware of any issues with ants being like a common vector of diseases into people by their food or by biting them or stinging them. With ants, we deal more with things like their actual venom. So you have things like harvester ants or fire ants, which we have in abundance here in Albuquerque, and they can cause damage by stinging you, and that's kind of like getting a bee sting.
Yeah, so this time of year, we definitely, like Brian mentioned, get the increase in the phone calls about the ants. Sometimes we'll see, swarms of ants, and people can confuse those for termites. What's the best way for someone to be able to tell if they're dealing with a swarm of ants or a swarm of termites?
Well, I mean, you can look at pictures on the internet and kind of compare. But it's difficult, right? They look pretty similar. And, we still have people in our office that say, is this an ant or a termite? I'm like, well, you work in pest control and you don't know. So I would say, yeah, it's hard to tell. I would say just reach out to somebody who's trained and ask them. In reality, ants have a little waist and termites don't. Right, so that's the best way to determine. So flying ants have, if you imagine what the body of a wasp looks like, where there's the head and there's kind of the thorax that has the legs coming off of it, and then there's a tiny little waist, and then the abdomen. Right. Well, ants are kind of the same way. Okay. The termites are just like a tube, like a sausage. Like they have no waist.
Yeah. Yeah. And the wings are definitely different too.
The wings are different. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely, yeah, and but they do a lot of the same things. So, like, they're cued by environmental triggers. Say for termites, for example, in the spring and the fall, it can be we can have a period of rain and then like a sunny day after that, and almost certainly in March or October, you're going to see the termites coming out.
I think we've got some phone calls about a couple weeks ago because it rained a little bit and it warmed up, and we got some termite swarmers running around, flying around. So,
and all throughout the summer, we're going to get the winged ants, and they do the same thing. So, what is a winged ant? Is just the reproductive form of the colony. So, they're the males and the females. That their whole job is just to fly out, try to find males and females from the same species from another colony and mate, and the males die.
Their own colony.
Yep. And then the females, if they successfully mate, will go and try to, build a new home somewhere else. So when people get flying ants coming up, like say a vent in their floor or a crack, in the kitchen or something coming up the floor, they start freaking out thinking, I've got this infestation and we need to spray. Well, it's difficult to treat for because these are usually a one-way trip. And a lot of the tools we use to treat for ants are slow-acting materials that transmit through body contact, right? And so if these flying ants are only on a one-way trip, we can't use them as a way to get the material back to the colony as we would with other, like the workers.
And I guess on the subject of ants, just to it is this time of year. Is there anything besides calling on professionals that customers can do? Because they're going to start seeing ants. It's just inevitable. It gets above 60 degrees, and all of a sudden people get ants are emerging in their gardens or in their house, and they didn't know they had them, and they get active. But is there anything proactively they can do?
Not really. I mean, we've talked about this, I think, in the past, too. It's important to make sure you don't have a bunch of organic material up against the outside of your house. So if you, from the last fall, if you have, 2 feet of rotting leaves that are up against the side of your house, that is prime territory for ants to set up. So get rid of that.
Spring cleaning.
Yeah, clean up, right? Yeah, and so if you see them inside, smash them, spray down some, all-purpose cleaner, Windex, whatever, and kind of wipe it down, disrupt that pheromone trail, and maybe you can keep them from being a bigger issue. But once you start seeing a trail of ants in your kitchen, aside from like taro or other baits like you can get over the counter, there's not much you can do. I mean, really, it
find
takes
a colony, pretty much.
Yeah, it takes getting a professional to get, literally dig around outside the house, try to figure out where identify the species, and then use that information to figure out how to treat for them.
Yeah, that's been my experience. If it's a rather small infestation, rather small colony you're dealing with, some baits might wipe it out pretty quick. But if they're pretty established or possibly impacted into the walls, then it's a lot of times your efforts, especially if you start reaching for the raid and stuff, might only exacerbate the issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. Raid, all of those, those sprays that has like a picture of an ant or a picture of a roach or whatever on it. Those are all a mix of different pyrethroids, which is a classic chemical that is repellent. And it's just you'll kill the ants that you spray directly, sure. But you're not going to stop the colony. They'll just avoid it.
So a tip for homeowners, if you're going to tackle it on your own, try to use something that's a bait, something they're going to consume rather than a spray. If it gets to the point where the bait's not working, then consider calling a professional.
I think yep, definitely.
Cool. And if it's termites, any DIY stuff for termites?
Yeah, DIY is call.
I think the only DIY for termites that I know is 100% effective is accelerant and ignition source.
We don't endorse that.
Dude, that's not an endorsement.
It's that one you're calling professional.
Yeah.
And I know people take care of themselves, but after a lot of help and consultation from a professional, they still didn't do a very good job of it, but they try to save money because it gets so expensive. Yeah,
termites are really specialized. Takes specialized material. Takes insecticides that most case you can't get unless you have a commercial pesticide license anyway. There's nothing you can do as a homeowner on your own for termites.
Well, we got some questions in the mailbag, and I guess kind of. In theme with going into the springtime, this first question is, what can I do to keep bees off the bushes by my front door?
Not much, right? I mean, bees are federally protected. They're specifically protected by Congress. It's in federal law. You cannot spray a bush where there are foraging bees on it. It's against the law. Well, I can't do it as a pest control professional, and a homeowner can't do it. They'd be breaking the law.
So use the back door. Then they're saying,
yeah,
right?
Or honestly, your choices are to get rid of the bush, or to just get used to the bees. But you can't spray them with insecticide. That is absolutely prohibited.
And if you just kind of walk by, usually not aggressive unless you're doing something to.
That's the thing.
Them.
Foraging bees are not at all aggressive. Like I have a giant Russian sage in my front yard that I walk by every day to go in my car, and it is about the size of this table, and it is flowing with purple flowers. 8 months out of the year, and it's covered with bees all the time. I will actively get my head in there and prune it in the summer because it grows aggressively. I've never been stung. Like, if you are messing with a beehive, that's one thing. But when you're just at a plant where they are, unless you're like trying to squish them or swat them or kill them, they leave you alone.
I know it's a lot of times when we get a call like that, we try and connect people with a beekeeper that could be a mutually beneficial thing. The beekeepers want to, if they can pick up a colony and relieve somebody from that. But a lot of times, like we said, they're just foraging. How can people know if it might be beneficial to call a beekeeper or not?
If you see a bunch of bees going in and out of a hole in a structure, like your cinder block wall on the outside of your house or in the yard, something like that, or maybe they're going under the pool cover or, under a shed or behind a shed, something like that. Places where you see the bees going in and out of a hole, that's when you know there's a hive. And then you can absolutely call a beekeeper, and most beekeepers are pretty motivated to get in there and retrieve it because that's how they get their bees to make new hives, put in their apiaries to collect honey. So you can, if you look online, there's a ton of beekeepers in Albuquerque. You can call a pest control company; they'll almost certainly be able to connect you with a beekeeper who will come out a lot of times for free,
right?
And because it's worth it to them to collect the bees. So
we recommend you do it quickly before that problem get too bad, where it causes damage in your walls or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, and just the main thing to remember is that bees are protected for a reason, right? They are hugely important. We, as a pest control company, are super aware and try to be good stewards of bees and not do anything that's going to harm them. And we urge other people to do the same.
Right. This other question that came up seems to be a pretty common one that kind of tells you what people think of our industry a little bit. But what is the most gross bug to deal with?
Ooh, definitely bed bugs. Definitely bed bugs, hands down. Of all the things, I've dealt with some gross stuff over the years, but bed bugs always give me I still get the shivers when I'm around.
Been into some disgusting, gross houses.
Yes,
and it wasn't bed bugs; they're gross. But
so you say people?
Yeah, that's honestly. If I get into a discussion with someone, it's usually the people that are sometimes that are kind of allowing this or have a.
Not saying that everyone that has them is bad,
but we're not necessarily saying that people are bugs.
No, but sometimes the bugs come as a result of just poor sanitation and things like that. So I can't really blame the bugs for trying to take advantage of that. But
Yeah, I agree. People get gross, and people are the root cause of a lot of these pest issues, right?
Yeah.
Because of their negligent behavior.
And as I say that, it's kind of occurring to me that it probably comes off as a little bit judgmental. Sometimes they're dealing with some psychological issues and some health issues and stuff too. And
that's true.
So those are really the things, and that's our kind of our job as pest professionals is really to get to the root of what's going on.
Yeah,
there.
and to just try to help.
Exactly.
I have a question for you. Would you rather be locked in a room for 1 hour with 1,000 deer mice or one deer mouse that's the size of like a German Shepherd?
I think I'd take on the one deer mouse. They're not aggressive, right?
They got big teeth. I think if it was a deer mouse that size, its front teeth would be like that. It'd be like 8 inches.
Yeah, I'll take on the many small ones myself.
Yeah. I don't know if there is a right answer.
1,000 of them? It gives us one?
Yeah, in a big closet.
I think I could punt it. 1,000 make me crawling all over you, man. Oh wait, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's a right answer. They both sound unpleasant.
One giant black widow or 1,000 black widows.
I would take the giant one because
I'm saying
it wouldn't be able to move. Right, this thing was with bugs. When you scale them up, their body gets too heavy for those little legs, and it couldn't even walk.
Yeah,
at least that's what I'm gonna go with.
I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. But.
Well, kind of summarizing what we've talked about today. Talking about these vectors and different diseases that might be spread by different pests. What are some things we should have people take away from this episode today?
I think know the ones that you should be wary of, and then understand which ones really can't cause an issue, right? Like bed bugs are creepy, but they're not going to give you diseases like a mosquito can. Especially if you're out in more rural areas or further east in the country, ticks are a big one, and ticks should be taken seriously. So wearing, just like with mosquitoes, wear insect repellent, and if you have them on, you get them off. But yeah, and just keep pests away from your food. That's the big one, right?
Right. Yeah, it sounds like just use a little bit of common sense, ask some questions, be diligent, but don't necessarily need to overreact.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're going to be dealing in areas where there have been mice or mouse activity, just wear some gloves, put on a mask, keep yourself safe.
So like a lot of people that end up living in a place where it might be very remote from people seem to, they're a little bit more of a issue with being exposed to the deer mice, and so they probably suggest a little more caution.
I would
when
certainly.
you're in those rural areas too, for sure.
Yep. If you're doing spring cleaning in your shed and there's a bunch of mouse droppings, that should be your cue to be very careful.
Well, thanks again, Mike, for coming. I kind of like your little would you rather. Maybe we should do that every week. It's like a would you rather, like just random thing we can come up with, right? But it's a good little subject.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always have fun doing this.
I'd like to thank our audience for listening today and encourage you to subscribe for the more pest-related health tips and just tips on pests in general. And what's bugging you? Thank you, and we'll see you next time.